So hey everyone, and welcome to Rare Liquid. Today I'm joined by Cherie and Jean, and we're going to be talking about everything you want to know about product management. And so first thing I just want them to do is give an intro about themselves and why they wanted to be product managers in the first place. So Cherie, can you take it away?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Cherie Liu, and I recently graduated from Stanford GSB. So Ben and I are the same year there. After graduation in June, I am a full-time content creator and entrepreneur. Jean and I have started our own podcast called Tiger Sister Podcast, which we host. And also we have our own matcha brand called Sisters Matcha, which we're drinking right now.
I'll leave a link, so check it out in the description.
And before going to business school, I was a product manager, which is what we're going to be talking about here in this episode. I worked at LinkedIn for 5 years, and I led engineering and design teams on growth and retention on LinkedIn Learning and our notifications team. So I really fell in love with product management when I was in college. Jean will tell you a little bit more about how we both became product managers, but I studied computer science in undergrad. So with my engineering degree, I did a couple of internships. And during one of my engineering internships, I really discovered I really enjoyed the product and project management of my project that I was working on that summer. And so I leaned a little bit more into that side of it. It was like the creative aspect, the business aspect that I felt like I was really missing, just focusing on engineering specifically. And so through those internships, I, in my junior year, worked at LinkedIn as a PM intern, and that's how I got started. It led into my full career.
Awesome. Jean?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jean Liu. I'm co-founder of Sisters, along with Cherie, which is a content to commerce business, which is the kind of holding company for Tiger Sisters Podcast and Sisters Matcha. Most recently, I was the head of product for augmented reality shopping at Snapchat, which is where I worked in product for the last 6.5, almost 7 years. Before I worked in AR shopping, I built up and scaled our AR monetization business. So basically augmented reality ads, turning that into like a $300 million a year business and kind of scaling from there. And then before that, I worked in product at Zynga, building Farmville, which was a mobile social game. And before that, I started my career at Goldman Sachs as an investment analyst.
So can you briefly explain how you went from being an investment analyst, maybe as you're explaining like why you wanted to get into product, how that transition happened?
Yeah. So I think that was my first big career change, is that when I went in undergrad, I studied economics, and I was like super oriented towards finance. And I was like, oh, I really want to do finance after school. And I did. And part of my job as an investment analyst was to look at all these different companies that we were invested in and basically do like a preliminary amount of research so that I would have the questions ready to ask the fund managers when we interviewed them. And I kind of like noticed for myself that the types of companies that I was always really interested in researching and would like gravitate towards were more consumer tech companies. And so after like 2 years as an analyst, I kind of realized I was like, okay, I want to actually leave finance and work at one of these consumer tech companies. And I basically was like, what are even the jobs available at these companies? Like I had no idea. So I went through this basically entire like coffee chat series where I talked to as many people as possible. And that's how I even learned about the role of product management, because that was back in 2012 and it really wasn't common at the time. And it was especially uncommon, like really, really rare to get a PM role if you didn't have a technical background, which I did since I studied economics. And that was also why I really pushed Cherie to study computer science, because I was like, it'll kind of open doors for you and you'll just never get that sort of pushback that I did.
Yeah, I had we obviously have a lot of finance related people in my audience, and so they might be watching this, and I know a lot of bankers who try to also break into PM, some successfully, and then others it was a little bit tough. So that's really interesting to hear that you were able to do that, back then, which I'm sure was also not easy. And I think another important thing to note is Jean, well, actually, I'm curious before we move on to like our questions, is like how many people then were you in charge of at Snap when you were leading AR
I mean, it's a lot of the role of a product manager is kind of like managing by influence. So there were times when I led meetings of like hundreds of people, including lots of execs and even the CEO, where I would plan that meeting ahead of time and coordinate with the CEO and be like, hey, like, this is what I'm going to say. These are the people that we want to get buy-in from. And this would actually be really helpful if you said this and like I said this. So
back channeling.
CEO like Evan Spiegel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So like, there's just, so I guess it's like kind of hard to say. So I think like directly managed at most was 7 or 8 PMs at a time, but indirectly managed, like all of the different teams that needed to be on board for us to accomplish anything that we had on our objectives and key results was like hundreds.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to make it kind of clear for the viewers that, Jean has a lot of experience.
Jean's a big deal.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
But I guess that's also a good segue for explaining what a PM role or what the PM role really entails. So either of you guys, can you explain kind of like Eli 5, or you can get more into detail as to what a product manager is?
Yeah, sure. I can take this one. So a product manager at the most basic level, and right now we're talking about tech product management because a product manager could work in different industries as well. But in tech, whether you're at a big company or a startup, a product manager's role is to lead the vision and strategy of a product and make sure that it executes from ideation all the way in the beginning, all the way to when things launch and when you measure the results to see if the product was a successful launch or honestly a failure of a launch. And so in between that, like, you're working cross-functionally. You can't do it by yourself. Like Jean said, being a product manager, so much of the role is influencing without authority. So you're working cross-functionally with data scientists, engineers, UX designers, sales folks, in order to get an idea into a real product, whether it's digital or physical. And then once it launches and you're working with product marketers as well, like, how do we measure the success of this? And so it's basically, I kind of liken it to like a sports team captain, or honestly like the captain of a ship. People say like you have to be able to see and take in data from multiple points from your partners and distill that information down and lead your team or, your ship in the right direction.
I've heard a lot from my friends who work in tech, PMs, when you talk about leading or influencing without authority, I hear it's a really big challenge for all parties involved. Yeah. And so I'm curious for either of you guys, if you have any really good tips or things, almost, I don't want to call it tricks, but maybe like tactics or strategies when you're trying to implement, this influencing without authority for like engineers who are very busy and have to, they're very valuable resources and they have to pick and choose which PM to kind of listen to, or data scientists, etc. What strategies did you guys implement to have people kind of listen to you?
Sure. Do you want to take this or do you want me?
Yeah, I can take it. I think, no surprise, a lot of it is about getting alignment. And I think even before being able to get alignment with all the different parties involved, it's actually really understanding what drives each person, right? So like really trying to think like, okay, this other PM who's the head of product of this other part of the org, what are their goals? What are their written stated goals? And then what are their actual internal goals that they have? And how do they align with my goals and what I'm trying to convince them to do? And how do they not align? And then how do I like target my approach to them so that we have like the maximal alignment possible and like position it that way. Yeah. And I think if you take that approach for anyone you're getting into a conversation with, then it's like a much more like high likelihood of success, because you're not just coming at it from like, hey, this is what I want. And like, these are my goals and this is what's best for my business. You're already coming in with it being like, I know what I want, but I also think I know what you want. So this is how I think we can achieve our goals together by doing this one thing.
Yeah. One of my professors, Joel Peterson at the GSB, he would say, what is winning? Like, every conversation that you go into, whether it's with your boss or with someone that you're working with or someone that you're trying to motivate or convince, know what winning looks like before you go into that conversation. And that could also mean, what does winning for both parties look like as well?
Yeah, this reminds me of something we referred to in one of our earlier conversation videos of like House of Cards, and kind of just like figuring out what people want and moving like the ball forward, kind of.
Yeah, I think the House of Cards analogy paints it in a more like dystopian or like sinister way. But I really do feel like the positive side, and the way that everyone has their own style of moving the ball along. But I think a lot of it comes down to like empowering your team, and how do you make your team? How do you help support your team to do their best work? And a lot of that comes down to knowing their motivations. Like if the engineer on my team is super motivated to get promoted, like how can I bring up projects that he or she can then lead, spearhead, and that can help with their promotion? Or if someone, is motivated by other things like, being super technical or like figuring out this technical problem, has nothing to do with promotion or pay or anything. How can I help them in that regard and get them a really super technical, meaty project that helps me, sure, and my goals, but also helps them with their gols.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Great answer.
The reason I brought that up was not to actually paint it in a dystopian light, but then more so I was going to try to ask, there's a lot of politics in every company.
Yeah.
And this role kind of from an outsider's perspective seems like you kind of need to be good at that kind of stuff. Not necessarily like, politicizing in a nefarious way, but more so like being good with people, knowing what their intentions are, putting a lot of alignment together and all of that. Like how much I don't know what the word is, like
politicking.
Politicking is needed in the PM role.
Real politic. I would say a lot. I mean,
depends on the company.
The bigger the company and the more varied the roles and the more varied the goals that there are within a company, and the more senior you are, the more at least aware you need to be of politicking, because even if you're not doing it, everyone around you is doing it.
Right.
And if you're not the one that's like setting your goals and going out to like make things happen, things are going to happen to you. And I think like also part of it, things will
happen to you.
Yeah. I kind of like that though. You have to be kind of,
that's realistic.
Intentional.
Yeah. I mean, like if you're not moving your chess pieces, people are going to be moving their chess pieces, and then you're going to get eaten.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that sound sinister?
Yes, it does.
But I think also some of it is like understanding yourself and like what your role is and what your kind of like perception and area of power is in the ecosystem of your company and your business, right? So like some people, they have like mandated power, right? Like they get power from their role, like specifically their title, and they can kind of just like use that to get what they want. Other people, they have more like soft power, informal power through like specific relationships that they've or that they've built up over time, or like loyalty from specific people that they've built up or from their team. So it's also about like understanding what your like source of influence and power is, and then using that kind of like accordingly.
Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. I think we're going to probably dive a lot more into PM life and what it's all about. Before that, I actually wanted to start off a little bit more with how to break into PM. So can you guys walk us through first what the most helpful like resources were for you guys in terms of like preparing for your interviews and kind of like what the recruiting process is like for PMs?
Yeah. I think it can be kind of tough to break into PM, just like being very realistic, because oftentimes you're reading these job descriptions and it's like, in order to have this PM job, you need to have done this PM job for the last 5 years. And you're like, how come it's this never ending cycle?
Is it still tough these days?
I think so, because a lot of them require like entrepreneurial experience that some people might not have. And so my response to that is like, if you don't have PM experience, like directly, find projects or roles within your current job to help you get those PM skills. So if they're looking for like someone who can set strategy and you're like, oh, but like, you know, I'm a consultant and I want to pivot into PM and I've never, you know, actually worked in product management. What are some of the projects that I can take on where I can have more of that strategic thinking and then position it in a way that like I have those skills and then I can apply it to a product in the tech world. And so when I was in, I mean, this was a while ago, but this was when I was in college.
This is the Cherie lore.
This is
legendary.
Seriously.
It's not even, she's made the YouTube videos private.
Yes, exactly. Well, so when I was in college and I hadn't had any product management experience, I created my own app. And I was an engineering student, so I like wrote my own app, I designed everything, and then I launched it on the iOS App Store, created a marketing video. So basically doing all the things.
She got an investor, she got funding.
That's not true.
For me, I funded it.
Oh yeah, she funded my iOS app like fee, you know, my developer's fee for the developer's license. But basically doing all the things required, you know, on a very small scale of a product manager, so I can like gain those skills and then also talk about it in interviews.
Yeah, and she made a whole like marketing campaign behind it. She made this like whole like sizzle reel marketing video. She launched it. She like it was really cool. I was super impressed.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very actually unconventional suggestion for how to prepare for PM interviews and the whole recruiting process. But I also think in that process you get an understanding if you like that kind of work too, right? And so I think that's a great tip. Jean, do you have anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, for me, I would say if there's like a specific role that you're looking at, you should try to talk to as many people in and around that role as possible. So like for me, my first job at Zynga as a product manager, I luckily had a former classmate, shout out Tom Donahoe, love you, man, who worked at Zynga. And he was working, I think he was either working on like Words with Friends at the time, but basically I just like called him or emailed him. I was like, hey, Tom, like I'm applying for this role. Can you like tell me what it's all about? Like, what do you do? How do you prepare? Blah, blah, blah. And one advice that he gave me that I would give everyone is that if it's a product that you can actually like get your hands on or experience in any way, which like 99% of the time it will be, even if it's an enterprise product, like just really immerse yourself in the product. So he was like, pick a game to play. The one that I picked was like this like bubble game that was like had monkeys in it or something. And he was like, get to a certain level. He was like, make sure you play that game until you get to at least like level 15. And make sure you like at some point like pay in the game so you understand the payment flow. And then you really fully understand it both from a user perspective and then think about it as if you were the PM, right? Like think about what were the motivations of the PM to build this product this way. And if you were the PM now, what would you do? So like that was like super helpful because it's kind of like a way to hack what Cherie did. Yeah. So like instead of building your own product and being able to talk about it, really like deeply understanding the product at hand and then acting as if you were the PM of it already.
Yeah, I feel like that of all the things you said, the part of trying to understand the motivation of the PM when they were building it, I think that's really interesting. Like I haven't ever done anything like that, but that's like a lot of like psychology involved and stuff like that.
Yeah,
totally. How much like psychology is involved in?
You kind of do it today because what you did for preparing for this, your product is this podcast, right? So you were thinking today and writing these questions. You're like,
PM now.
Yeah. You're like, what do people really want to know? Like what parts, what questions and answers will people find the most interesting and the most useful? So you are a PM.
Well, and then also to answer that question, it's like you being very like what we call like customer centric, and you have to have a very like user or like members first point of view. That's what we called it at LinkedIn. But it's always putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's using the product and understanding like what are their emotions and what are their motivations. And I think it can be like consumer versus enterprise product. For consumer, it's a lot harder to be successful there because there's so many different types of consumers. Whereas on enterprise product, it's a different use case altogether. It's like people are using Salesforce for work, for example, and it's super clear what their goals and emotions are in the workplace. Like, you know, they have a mandate, they have to complete it. Whereas consumer tech, it's like a completely different ballgame.
Got it. Okay.
And then I think that's actually the other reason why talking to someone who's already in the role is super, super useful. And you should try to do that as much as possible is because the PM role is can be very different when it comes to role to role, like company to company, or even within a company.
Yeah.
So like, for example, one of the PMs that I worked very closely with when we were building the AR ad product at Snap, his time, like maybe 30% of his time was literally spent reading white papers, because his role was to come up with the algorithm and like improve the algorithm for ad targeting and ad distribution and like that entire like super technical part of the ad stack. Whereas like I spent very little time reading white papers. Like occasionally I did to like understand the like building blocks of the augmented reality tech that I was building on top of. But like that wasn't really my role as a product manager, right? So like really understanding before you even like talk to a hiring manager, like how technical is this role?
Yes.
And like how much does it suit your strengths versus, you know, your kind of like weaknesses or not as strong points.
Well, despite not reading any like technical white papers, Jean does have 50 patents in AI from
true.
Snapchat.
Wow.
That's true.
And I get
crazy.
to brag about my sister because she'll never brag about herself.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, all of that was developed at Snapchat or something, or?
Yes. Yeah. And then I have one from Zynga.
Ah, okay.
Guess how many I have?
It's okay. I have 0. But combined, we have 51.
True. True.
I imagine you may be tuning into this episode because you're interested in breaking into product management. And in that case, you're definitely going to want to consider Exponent. Exponent has been around since 2018 and has one of the best product management online interview courses out there that's taught by PMs from tech companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, and other top tech startups. And you can get started at an accessible rate of as little as $12 a month. Their PM course includes everything you need for your interview, including prep for product design, product strategy, analytical and execution questions, and a whole lot more. Exponent teaches what interviewers are looking for, provides a framework for how to approach the question, breaks down how you'll be evaluated across interview rounds into clear rubrics, and includes a catalog of over 100 mock interviews with real PM candidates. Exponent also has interview prep courses for other roles, including software engineering, machine learning, engineering management, data scientists, and more. So if you want to join the over 500,000 people who have used Exponent for tech interview prep, check out my link in this episode's description and use my code rareliquid for 20% off. On the theme of recruiting and all of that, though, when you guys have been on the side of being a recruiter and you're trying to interview people who are trying to become product managers, are there any red flags where you're talking to someone, you're like, oh, this really doesn't seem like the right fit for this person?
I mean, it goes back to being like user or member customer centric. I think a lot of the times people get really excited about a certain solution or an idea to solve a question. Like sometimes we'll pose a question and ask them like, what are some ideas? Because we want to hear how they're thinking through it. The way that you kind of would think aloud in a consulting interview, like we as interviewers for the product role really want to hear people's logic behind it. But when people jump, you know, far too quickly to a solution, that they have in mind because, you know, they've prepped for the interview and, you know, they're kind of ready for it. That's not exactly what we're looking for because solutions are a dime a dozen. Really what we're looking for is like, how well do you understand the end user, the user flow and how they're feeling and, you know, their like sentiment behind it. Then again, I guess to Jean's point, it also depends on the type of PM you are. Like if you're a super technical PM and you need to come up with like a bunch of solutions to a technical problem, that's quite different.
But even then, like even in that case, you need to like lay out like the technical problem, right?
Yeah.
Like you need to showcase it's like, okay, I understand. Yes, it's one technical problem, but it's never like super contained, right? It's always lives within this broader infrastructure and like a system.
Yeah. And then also, so I think the one thing is like going to solutioning too quickly, not being customer centric enough. And then the second thing that I think is a mistake is that when people do think about things that are too contained, because like everything at LinkedIn, we call it an ecosystem. All the different business lines, we have, you know, 5 when I was there, maybe there's more now, but like LinkedIn Learning, plus the feed that you see, plus profile, plus jobs, all of it touches one another because it's an ecosystem and all that data is intertwined. And I think the PMs that do really well understand the ecosystem perspective and being like, if I make this little change on this ad that's in feed, how does that impact, this sister team in their end goal as well? And so it's understanding how those things connect.
Yeah. And also being able to get buy-in from all those sisters teams.
Yeah.
To make that product happen.
That's harder to test in an interview, except you can give people scenarios in an interview where you're like, say that like this is happening, like, and you're super crunched for time and your VP of engineering doesn't agree with your approach. What would you do? So it's more behavioral, but then you can kind of understand how they would approach it.
Yeah. Or like be like, tell me about a time when you had to convince someone to do something that they really didn't want to do in like a work, setting.
I like to give scenarios.
I don't know what I do. I just vibe. I'm just like, do I want to, I don't know. It's like a lot of it is, do I want to work with this person?
For sure.
Like 10, 12 hours a day in and day out. Like, do I have a level of like mutual respect for them?
Trust.
Yeah. Trust and mutual respect and like ability to understand each other. And do I feel like I have something that I can learn from them? And also that they're open to learning.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm wondering for Jean if you feel like you have changed your interview style. Because when I see this contrast, I think if I was a little bit, I guess, younger, I would also, at least back then, would think more about when I was interviewing people in finance. I would ask them the technical questions and that's just how banking is actually. But now, if I interview someone, I'm a lot more of like, who is this person deep down? I kind of try to, in like the vibe in a sense. Do you think that as you get older, I guess like more senior, you start to interview in that way? Or were you always like this?
I think more and more so, because the other thing is once you're leading a team, you're also thinking about the composition of the broader team, right? So like, it's not like you don't want to ever hire someone if you're like, ooh, I think this person really won't get along with someone that already exists. It's not really that, but it's more so like you are the cruise director of your like entire team culture, right? So like for me, it was always really important to build a team where everyone was like super talented in at least one thing. Like I wanted T-shaped people, right? Like I don't want people that are just amazing all-arounders. I want each person to be like phenomenal at least one thing. And then everyone else in the team like recognizes how good they are at that and everyone else learns from them. So then like everyone basically like, tide rises all boats, whatever the phrase is.
Rising tide floats all boats.
Rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. And like for me, like if you approach it that way, it doesn't even matter what level you're hiring for, right? Like I had people that were like L2, L3 PMs, which is like more entry level, that were like phenomenal at one thing that my like L6 PMs were still learning from them and vice versa. And then the other thing is like, I always try to hire people that are better than me at something because then it kind of keeps the team more like flat in a way. Like everyone feels like they're like
peers.
Excellent. Yeah. Like peers in a way.
Yeah.
And everyone feels like, oh, like I'm leading this effort and people look to me for this. And then I think that way everyone has like a higher sense of autonomy and ownership, like regardless of what like level they come in at.
Yeah. I would also say when I was a senior product manager, I was an IC at LinkedIn before I went to business school. I would mostly hire product managers, so in the role below me, or also talk to associate product managers as well. And I think in that case, because it's so entry level, there was still a question of skill and legitimacy. Whereas I think when Jean is, leading teams and also hiring people who are much more senior, especially if they have a track record of places they've been and accomplishments, I think you're sometimes sussing out less skill and more vibes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And kind of on a similar wavelength, what do you guys think? I feel like it's kind of been touched upon a little bit, but what do you think separates a good product manager from a great product manager?
I think a great product manager is someone who, it doesn't matter what level you are, you understand the broader vision and all of your decision making and the strategy that you set out and the roadmap and the actions are aligned with that broader vision. Because you would be shocked by like how many people really do not understand the vision. Like, and they're still just like going about and like doing their jobs and trying to like optimize for, I think, much more like local minimums versus like if you understand the broader vision, then like everything you're doing is kind of optimized for like the universal maximum.
Kind of like what Cherie was talking about, right? Yeah. Like at LinkedIn, how the feed and all the different aspects like combine with each other.
Yes. An example of that would be like, oh, I'm a PM of, profile, and I just want to like hit my OKRs, and, it's my team that I'm just trying to optimize for. Like, yes, I can do that. And at the end of the quarter, like I'll do well. But if that negatively affects another team as well, that's not thinking on like a senior product manager or even like, a manager level where you're thinking about like 2, 3, 4 teams. And that's really how you up level.
Right. I have a follow-up question then, because this applies not just to professional, but also personal life, of just like finding a balance in almost every aspect. But in this particular situation, you have to kind of look out for yourself and go for your goals while also including what other people want, which may be directly opposed to what you want. It's very it can get very complicated and complex. What it comes down to, though, I think, is balancing everything as much as possible. So how do you achieve that as a PM?
Basically, Ben's like, how do you sleep at night?
It's kind of like the crux of the question of like, I don't know, that is like the crux of the question, basically. It's kind of impressive that you like got to it. How do you achieve it?
I guess the way that I would answer this, it really depends on the culture of the company, on how it's achieved. And can it be achieved with you still, feeling good and supporting and empowering people who are on other teams, or who also might be like quote unquote competition. So I think at LinkedIn, I had a really positive experience working with like my manager, who I really trusted, and also the other people in my associate product management like cohort. We all had like the same start cohort, and we really supported each other, especially in the beginning. And it didn't really feel like competition because we were on separate teams. And like even one thing that we did that was really special was just like we shared salary and bonuses and raises with each other. And I think because of that culture of a rising tide lifts all boats, I was indoctrinated into thinking that like I'm able to do all these things and do it in a way that I still feel very proud of, and not in like a sharp elbow kind of ick way, which I think like a lot of people can turn to immediately if it feels very political.
Yeah, and I think it's so important also that the company tied in your compensation to helping the rest of your team. I feel like that structurally helps a lot to enforce this culture too.
Yes. And also I've heard at like companies like Meta, a lot of the times your compensation is directly related to your OKRs and if you achieved your set out like metrics for your product. At LinkedIn, and I'm not saying one's better than the other, I'm just saying my experience. At LinkedIn, it's not only like what you achieve, but how you do it. We have these like obviously like 365 reviews, and in order to get promoted, you need feedback from the people that you work with. Like your designer needs to be supportive. Your like main designer that you're working with needs to be supportive of your promotion, the main data scientist that you're working with. So if you're like an ick person and trying to do things in an unsavory way, then like it will come back and like you won't reach your end goal, especially if you're at a company that doesn't support that.
Jean, any thoughts about the balance?
I mean, I think it's about being realistic for part of it and understanding the situation as best as you can. And like, I think sometimes the reality of it is that in certain companies, there can be conflicting goals. Like even at the highest levels of the company, there can be directly conflicting goals. And then also sometimes you find out that sometimes those conflicting goals are by design, right? Like sometimes those are set out in a way to like incentivize competition to try to, generate multiple potential solutions to an open-ended problem, right? So like, that's almost like, it's like, you know how people talk about like the known unknowns? That's almost like an unknown unknown that you need to like suss out. It's like, what are the actual stated goals? And then what are the goals that people have that are not stated? And like, where do you fall within that? And then how do you navigate and lead your team and try to achieve your like stated goals within that environment?
Yeah. And I was just thinking, I was just like, oh, isn't this something that's not unique to product management? Like I was just having that train of thought. But I think something special about product management, and you can talk about it in finance, that it's just so cross-functional, that you're working with so many different disciplines and personalities because of those disciplines. Like for example, the stereotypical like engineer is very different from the stereotypical designer, different from the PM, you know? Like those archetypes are quite different. And so I think there does have to be a lot more people management than, you know, if you're all in the same like vertical of like finance.
Yeah, I'd say that there is a lot of cross-functional team work that is needed in finance too, but then everyone's still a finance bro or girl, you know, at the end of the day. So like I might be working on a IPO with the equity capital markets team, and then I would maybe be in like a coverage team or something like that. And we'd have to work with like different teams for different deals. Yeah, but at the end of the day, like we all kind of speak the same language.
Right.
And personalities are somewhat similar.
Yeah.
Versus I know that some of my engineering friends are like way different than my PM friends seem to be a little bit more, you know, bubbly and like good with people. Some of my engineering friends are like so awkward. They've gotten a lot better over time, but you know, they were at least back then in college.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's actually probably a very big difference there.
I will say it depends. I always come back to like the culture of the company.
Yeah.
And something we talk about is who has the decision-making power at the company. And at LinkedIn, it's a very product-focused company. So if there's ever a conflict between the different team members, like engineering or data science or design, the product manager at the end of the day has the D, is what we call it. We have that's what people call it, because they have the decision-making power.
Okay.
Yes. Whereas, for example, at Airbnb, because Brian Chesky and also like the other, I guess, like founding team have like more of a design background, I know the designers have the decision-making power at Airbnb, and same thing with Spotify, I've heard as well. So that, for example, at Spotify, if you know they have two tests, like A/B tests running, one performs better than the other, but one has a nicer aesthetic. Sometimes they will choose the one that does not perform as well, but just like honestly like looks better and has a better aesthetic. And I think that's great because Spotify has a very design oriented product that people like live and die by. But that's just a very different way of, you know, resolving conflict as well, is like knowing who has the decision-making power.
Yeah, I think that's also something to keep in mind if you're looking at different companies, is to like, you can always sort of take the CEO as like a litmus test and be like, okay, what is the CEO's background, especially if they're like the founder CEO? What is their personal background? And more likely than not, that's going to be the area that the company like defaults to in terms of like decision-making power.
They say Google and Meta is more engineering led, although I think Meta is more PM led now.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote about something about like the company is the founder's long shadow or something like that.
Oh, I've never heard that.
Because whatever the founder, and what their personality is like, what they care about, their company is just basically what they care about.
I like that.
They have all the decision-making power.
That's literally what people call it.
So,
I just say the company is their baby.
yeah.
They have a long shadow.
Slightly different topic, but Cherie, you kind of were talking about how the incentives were structured in a way to help the everyone to kind of work together at LinkedIn. So everyone is always curious about like compensation in any kind of interview that I have. So I was wondering if you guys could touch upon how compensation works as a PM and what people could kind of expect, maybe just at the entry level, and how it scales over time. Yeah. Without like, you know, it doesn't have to be exact numbers, but just like roughly, how does compensation work in product management?
Sure. I can give a breakdown of the different factors that go into comp at a big tech company or even a startup as well. And then also recently, Lenny, who is a PM influencer. Lenny Rech, I can't say his last name.
We'll find him.
Lenny R has recently put up here it is, a scale of the ranges of where PMs are paid. This is not new information. You can still find this on Glassdoor, but I think it's helpful to have all the ranges listed out. Okay, so as a product manager working in tech, your comp will be made up of 3 things, basically. 1 is base salary, and 2 is bonus. So however those come in quarterly or, every 6 months or yearly. And then 3rd is stock. So a lot of tech companies have RSUs, restricted stock units. It depends on the stage of the company that you're at. For the most part, the thing that scales the most, especially if you're at a startup, is the stock that you get. And if you are a new grad, if you're working at a big tech company, you can see from Lenny's graph, I forgot what it was. It was something to 120, the low end. Let me pull it up.
But that graph is just for
US
base compensation.
Yes,
it's not including the bonus or the RSUs or stock compensation.
So for an entry level IC, individual contributor, the range is from 100K to 125K is what it says. And I would say that's pretty on par. This is only the base salary, not the TC, which is total comp, which includes all 3 things. Something that I think is interesting is that there can be some senior level ICs that get paid more than managers according to this graph that Lenny laid out. I think it really depends on the company that you're at, the size of the company, and then also the tenure of the IC. And also the tenure of the manager. So I think that's also maybe where some of the discrepancy comes from.
So then let's say 1 year out of college as a product manager, total comp, what would the number be or the range where you'd be that's reasonable for a job in tech, SF, LA, New York, big cities?
I have no idea. Including
it depends.
stock?
It depends on the company because of stock.
Right.
It really depends.
I don't know, 300?
I was 2 to 3.
Oh, your first year out of college.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I guess I just wanted people to hear it from you guys.
If you're at a startup, definitely
right.
It's harder to say because it's so much more speculative.
Mm-hmm. That stock could be 0, basically.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Also, the stock vests typically over the course of 4 years.
Yes.
So you don't get all of that at once.
Yeah.
That's really important. There's a vesting schedule that comes with stock, which is what Gina's talking about. So basically, you get it over time.
Yeah. And I know a bunch of my friends who became product managers, they also got 50K signing bonuses, which is probably not included in what we discussed. So
Oh, wait, I would say that would be included.
Oh, included.
Included.
Okay. 200 to 300.
Yeah, and 2 to 3K.
Got it.
I would say for this chart, I don't know why this person made the first 3 rows orange.
Because those are IC.
Oh, okay. Because what I would say is I think the first 3 rows look about accurate to me, but then I think anything beyond that it's kind of up to the discretion of the company, and the company can have very different
bands.
And a lot of times those bands far overlap each other. And so I would say after the orange, it's kind of anyone's game. For me, I don't think it's accurate after the orange, but that's my own personal experience. And it also depends on if your company is sort of more aggressive in trying to win the compensation point or not.
Yeah, I would also say for VP, I've heard anecdotally VP, senior VP, this is only the base salary, but with total comp, it could go up to $1 million. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've heard about these salary bands.
Yeah, much more than $1 million.
Yeah.
I've heard about these salary bands and stuff like that. What about in terms of tips for negotiating? Because how do you try to figure out what the salary band is for a company unless you have a friend there or something like that? And that plus, so basically, let's say you have an offer for 150K, but you feel like you can try to get for a little bit more. How do you figure out what's a reasonable amount, and do you have tips for negotiating?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's doing your research, whether it's if you have someone obviously who's a friend who you can talk openly with about this stuff at that company, that is like your greatest source. Obviously, you can go to like Glassdoor or LinkedIn Salary, places where you can find out that information just to understand like what is the market rate. But then you also kind of have to just rely on yourself and being like, this is what I was paid previously, and this is the good work that I've done, and this is why I know I'm worth this much. I think that's as much as you can do. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, I think it goes back to like, who are you working for? And if that person believes and trusts in you, like that will be more than, you know, a couple like grand that you can make more.
Got it.
I would also add that at different companies, their leveling standards can be different.
Yeah.
So like at some companies, the like entry level PM role is L1. At some other companies, they call it L2. And other companies, they call it L3.
So at LinkedIn, we didn't even use L's. I don't even know what this L system is. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. And some companies don't even have like number systems. Or like at Microsoft, it's like L58 or something. I don't know how that works, but it's like a weird number for like L58 would be like a high level IC or something. I don't know. So it's also like, again, like understanding the landscape so that you're even like making sure you're comparing apples to apples.
Hey guys, so we're gonna pause the interview here because it went a lot longer than expected. There was just so much, great insight that each of Jean and Cherie had. And so we are gonna split this up into 2 videos. You'll be able to see the next one soon.
Is this the best interview you've ever done, Ben?
Definitely up there. Actually, I think it was a really good balance of fun plus insight.
Yeah.
So I would consider it really up there.
Well, also you haven't really gotten into like the PM world. So I feel like you also had some like very genuine curiosity about like the role and what it entails.
Yeah, it was actually really fun contrasting my experience in finance and just hierarchical kind of environment versus like the PM role, and also with like the whole, actually I don't know if it's going to be part of this video, but the M&A portion that we talked about, that part was also really interesting.
Well, more to come. It's a teaser.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you guys for watching as always, and part 2 will be coming out soon. I'll leave links for all of the things that these 2 are working on in the video description. So stay tuned for that next episode.
See you. Bye.